Hello and welcome back. Today we will be doing a reacts video to Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, on Israel and Palestine. I find that, a lot of his stuff kind of stands the test of time regarding his opinions, and this is a young Christopher Hitchens, so it's going to be from quite a while ago, but I think that a lot of, the same themes are going to be relevant, and that it's timely given what's going on today. Now, in order to be kind of as transparent as possible, I'm going to first kind of give a brief overview of my own perspective, and then we will get into the react video. So I was not initially going to record something on the Israel-Hamas situation, but then I decided, I came across this, and while Hitchens is talking about Israel-Palestine, and it's not quite the same thing, I thought it would be, relevant. And the reason I didn't want to discuss it is because I think that a lot of people are not going to necessarily change their mind, or there won't be a nuanced discussion on this type of thing. Not that it is not something that is, important to think about or know about, but in terms of me being able to provide any sort of, thing. There's, roughly speaking, three things that come to mind when I think of, how discussion on this conflict goes, which is, first, a condemnation of Hamas is not an endorsement of Israel. That's generally where I'm coming from, where, I think what Hamas is doing is horrible, to the extent that it would almost be, absurd to me to point out how horrible it is because it's so obviously horrible, but this doesn't necessarily mean it's an endorsement of the other side, right? Which is what generally happens in kind of superficial discourse, is anytime, if you condemn Republicans, then it's seen as an endorsement of Democrats, and if you condemn Democrats, it's seen as an endorsement of Republicans, and I think that type of thinking doesn't necessarily follow, and that being aware of that is very important for, making any sort of evaluation on what's going on with Israel vis-a-vis, Palestine, Hamas, and I forget the name of the one in the north, but those guys as well. And then secondly, a point I wanted to make is making equivalencies is often done in bad faith. When you say that Hamas does some horrible thing and then someone responds, well, what about what Israel did that's similar to this sort of thing? Just because there are similar lines of thinking in terms of what's going on, it doesn't mean that they're remotely in the same sphere of intensity, right? And you can have two bad guys, and you can have one guy considerably worse than the other guy, such that you support the less bad guy, right? And the third thing I wanted to mention, which I think Hitchens is going to come from this perspective, because he identifies as humanist, and I identify as a humanist, is that, having two theocratic states that identify their own people as the chosen people, and the others as being others, is going to necessarily lead to tribalism, and it leads to a sort of situation where I don't know if there's any sort of conceivable resolution that's not horribly distasteful, in the sense that if you do not respect the lives of the people who are from the other group, obviously bad things are going to happen. So let's get into what Christopher Hitchens has to say on Israel and Palestine. Haven't watched this yet, or if I did watch it, it's been a while. So let's get into it. Alrighty.
Christopher Hitchens, let's go to Cambridge, Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much. Mr. Hitchens, I have three direct questions, short questions for you, please. Do you feel that Israel has a right to exist within secure borders?
I assume
Do
Hitch
you
says
feel
yes.
that the United States should intervene should Iran or Russia try to close the Straits of Hormuz? And would you seek relief from a 24-hour shoot-on-sight curfew from any quarter in which relief might be found?
So it sounds like the context is there's currently an ongoing conflict, which I admittedly don't know that much about at the time of the recording of this interview. Interesting to hear USA, Russia, and Iran all mentioned together there, because of course, Iran is sponsoring, or it seems very clear that Iran is sponsoring Hamas, who did attack Israel a few days ago.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for the call.
Very good questions, and I think I know what you're trying to pin me down on. On the first, yes, I do, but I think the securely recognized borders should not allow for Israeli colonization or occupation of the territory of its neighbors.
So this is an important distinction. He wants, both Israel and Palestine to exist. And this is kind of where I would be at too, but I don't know how you get them to live together in a way where there's no violence, given the theocratic nature of both states.
Which is what it's doing now. The right to exist argument has been has been used now to the point where what it's going to mean is that the Israel you're talking about will include the annexed and illegally occupied West Bank.
So it seems that he does not agree with this pushing of the borders.
So the right to exist argument is going to rebound on those who use it unclearly and who don't say what they mean by Israel. It's very interesting, the Israeli government has never said where it thinks the borders of Israel really ought to be and what it would settle for. I think it would be an immense help if Israel's going to insist on the right to exist, if it tells us where it thinks Israel's boundaries should be. Every other country does do that.
So it looks like we're going to have a compilation, but that certainly makes sense, to me, that you can't just keep moving the boundary, which is my understanding of what has been going on regarding Israel. The intention here is not to drag Israel necessarily in this video, but as I was mentioning at the beginning, you can have two bad guys in a loud car outside. Let's get into the next video.
Straight answer. I think Zionism, the idea of building a state of Jewish farmers on Arab land in the Middle East, is a stupid idea to begin with. I've always thought so.
Okay.
My mother wanted to go.
Just to, mention, it's perhaps the case that I think it was in the 40s that when the UK turned over the land to the Jewish people, that maybe, the Allies or they should have been providing, land or asylum to all the Jewish migrants instead of, giving them what was once, I think, Ottoman land before the UK took it, like sometime in the 20s, something like this. And before it was like Egyptian, and then Ottoman before that, something like this.
As I understand it. I tried to talk her out of it. It's been a thing in my family. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a messianic idea. I think it's a superstitious idea. And I think
so the idea of Israel's right to exist is
now that it's there,
has no play with you.
Many states are founded on injustices or foolishness and bad ideas.
And boundaries are drawn by all kinds of political.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that anyone can just come and evict or destroy them. And I'm not saying that, but I think I'd have to say, so as not to seem shady, I've always thought it's a silly, messianic, superstitious nationalist idea, and it's a waste of Judaism.
Hitchens, notably as a humanist, is going to deviate from nationalism in almost every case because, the essence of nationalism is that your own nation's people are more important than other people, and if you're a humanist and you believe in, the importance and equality of all life, then you will generally have a distaste for any sort of nationalist idea that supports one nation's people at the expense or brutalization of another.
And it guaranteed a quarrel with the Arabs because it meant we're going to take away from you what's most precious, your land, by trying to make Jews into peasants. Already a silly idea. That's not the way to rescue Central European Jewry and make them into farmers in Palestine. Guaranteed an injustice to the Arabs, which now anyone can see, and is now entering its third, fourth generation. Fourth generation of Palestinians brought up either in exile or dispossession or under occupation and humiliation. And now we know something has to be done to address what is part of the original, let's not put original sin, original misconception of the thing. So I've been writing in favor of Palestinian homeland all my life. I'm no more, no less in favor of it than I was recently.
And now,
so I suppose that a lot of this will then be pro-Palestine, which is not necessarily the video I had intended on making because I think what Hamas is doing is terrible. But Hitchens, in a lot of other places, very openly denounces, the ideas of Islam that are going to. I mean, he's an anti-theist, which is not a position I hold, where he denounces like Islam as being necessarily violent, and I'm curious to see in this compilation if we will see any of that. I don't think that it's necessarily the case that it's necessarily violent. I haven't read enough of the Quran to like sort of make this evaluation, but I think that it's a state-sponsored terrorism regarding Hamas.
Now the Bush administration.
It's a matter of principle.
And now the Bush administration in favor of it.
Well, yes, they were edging towards it. It's a pity about the time because they were edging towards it before. I don't want it to look as if they did it as a concession. But it should be a matter of principle. If Jews born in Brooklyn have a right to a state in Palestine, then Palestinians born in Jerusalem have a right to a state in Palestine. Anyone who doesn't agree with that principle, I think, is suspect.
I think most people do.
They do, but but why in that case do we have the one and not the other? After all, it's America that pays for all this. Arms the Israelis is very much involved. If it's a matter of principle, then we should have witnessed to it a bit more forcibly.
So it is, yeah. I mean, I guess we'll continue.
On the point of purchase, I'd like to take up on a single word. Very
2010.
important. You wouldn't say, would you, that the United States has no purchase on the government of Israel? No, I wouldn't. I mean, in other words, if the Israelis are going to continue to build settlements in an identifiable, just a single suburb of Jerusalem, where most of the Arab population can produce documents proving they've owned their homes since before the British Mandate.
This is critically, like, not that I have an abundance of reading on the material, but this to me seems, the eviction seems to be particularly problematic. But eviction, it's important, like, with what's going on right now, it's important to note that forcible eviction, I think, is terrible. But, the, like, decapitation of babies, for example, which Hamas did coming in, and, brutal, violent, like, kidnapping and, sexual assault and all this type of stuff is just, it's on a completely different level of intensity. And so while you can dislike two sides, the drawing equivalencies, I don't think is necessarily appropriate.
If you notice, if American policy can't get them to stop building in that one identifiable suburb of Jerusalem, then there's no such thing as leverage or purchase. And Obama went to all the trouble to point out that this is a terrible thing. He should have said more than he did, in my view, that it's theft as well as an obstacle to negotiations. And then walked away from that. So that a punk government like that of Netanyahu, under the influence of a ratbag religious party, the Shas party, crackpot Orthodox party that happens to run the Ministry of Housing, is allowed to humiliate the United States, not just in the person of its vice president, who was there at the time, but its president and its Congress and its voters.
It's perhaps I was expecting a little bit more of both sides, and it's perhaps good that we are, like, listening to kind of the other side. And I don't disagree with anything Hitchens is necessarily saying here regarding Israel, but it's also just not exactly what I was expecting.
And immediately the president backpedals, and now he's being attacked by some leading American Jewish organizations as being, in principle, anti-Israel. So he's had a fight with one of the Democratic Party's most important voting blocs. He's done nothing for the Palestinians, and he's made himself look like a jerk. This is not impressive.
But when was American policy in the Middle East impressive?
Well,
that's a good question. Also, like, I think that it's often good, if you have a perspective, it's often good to hear the other side. So if you've never heard some of the complaints against, what Israel does, perhaps this is, good to listen to just for a different sort of perspective, but it's very much not what I'm focused on now.
actually, I'll give you an example. When George Bush Sr. Said to the Israelis, if you go on like this, I will ask Congress to suspend your loan guarantees, I thought that was extremely impressive. And so did everyone else in the Middle East, and it led to the nearest we've ever had to a proper peace conference. That was in Madrid. Bill Clinton chose to run that year from the right against Bush, saying that he thought Bush was being soft on Cuba, just like Kennedy. Thought Eisenhower and Nixon were being soft on communism in Cuba, and also from the right on Israel, saying if he was president, the Israelis would not be subjected to this kind of pressure. So the last time that there was an impressive American policy, it was a Republican administration, and it was undone by the hero of every liberal in this room.
Hitchens is notably not a fan of the Clintons at all. He wrote a polemic sort of hit piece on the Clintons, and he's also very much on the left. So him endorsing, Bush on the right is, a bit of a weird one, but he was also a fan of the Iraq War because he thought Saddam was so horrible and needed to be removed as a humanist kind of principled position.
Good morning.
Great. So let's see this one.
Like your type of argument, you basically have intellectual discussion instead of a screaming argument. I'm a libertarian. I'm basically on the opposite side of the spectrum as you. But I wanted.
I'm glad to see Hitchens disagreeing because I don't think it's necessary. I think Hitchens is relatively libertarian in a lot of ways.
If you could clarify a couple things for me. I believe Palestine was the entire area covering Israel and Jordan. I wonder if you could tell me at what point the Palestinians went to Jordan, and I realized they were kicked out when they blew up some passenger jets or something. And are you familiar with that?
Yes, I think more than you are. by the sound of it. I'm not sure. I don't. Well, go ahead.
Basically revolved around the Palestinians that were from Israel. I don't understand the there's 22 Arab states, why they have to take over Israel.
Well, there are 49 American states. If someone told you couldn't, apart from the one you're sitting in, if someone told you actually we would rather have your bit of Los Angeles for ourselves, from now on, this will only be this. You can only be a landholder or a householder here if you profess the, let's say, Muslim or Buddhist faith. Otherwise, get out. This bit's ours. You're happy to go to Colorado on that basis? I don't think so, and I think if you think about it, you wouldn't insult anyone
it's a decent
else
analogy.
by treating them, their society or their country as disposable as that. The Palestinians do not feel that God gave the land to someone else and they therefore have to be flung out. And I completely agree with them.
Hitchens notably spent a lot of time in the Middle East.
They've every right to resist that ridiculous proposal.
Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. The Hitchens, that was an area as a journalist that he covered quite a bit. He did a lot of interview with the Kurdish people who were leading, resistance of various kinds and have been very much oppressed. And he is very much on the side of the Kurds, but he is also apparently more on the side of the Palestinians than I remember, which is, I think that it's a case of, it's not necessarily clear that there's like a good guy in this sort of race, as it were.
Good morning. A question for Mr. Hitchens, please.
You're on.
Ask away.
Do you believe it's healthy for the United States to be so much influenced by Israel? We are a large country. They are very small, but they have much influence in the media and especially in politics.
Thanks.
Well, believe me, I know, I believe I understand the question, and there are various tones of voice in which it can be asked, including a tone of voice that I don't like, that suggests that there's a sort of covert Jewish hand that directs U.S. policy, which is not true, and but
I've always, I'm glad that Hitchens does point this out. The anti-Semitic, Jews are running everything type of lines of discourse. I've never much been a fan of. If you can't provide very clear evidence, it seems very conspiratorial, but
very often clusters with other forms of unpleasantness. I do think that the United States gives far too great a proportion of its military aid budget to Israel, and in return asks for insufficient Israeli responsibility. The Israelis are the custodians of the West Bank by an act of war. Their occupation of it is not recognized as legal. I've already said what I think should happen about that. There should be a West Bank state. The United States could make that difference. You could say to the Israelis, we will defend the existence of a Jewish community or a Jewish state in Palestine. We will not underwrite it becoming an expansionist and colonial state.
There's about a 0% chance of that happening, given the current state of affairs, where, the U.S. is obviously in the region there to allow, Israel to deal with Hamas, and make sure that no one interferes with Israel while they're dealing with Hamas. Whatever dealing with is going to mean from Israel's perspective, which we don't know at this juncture, and I don't want to speculate.
Okay. If you want to do that, you pay the difference yourself. That alone would have probably solved the problem by now. And I do wish, yes, if you want to put it like that there was more cogent discussion along those lines in both the media and in Congress. And as for the Israelis, everybody knows that I don't seem to duck that question because I know how toxic it is. Everybody knows that if you want to occupy people against their will, if you want to be the governor of another people who haven't chosen you, you will end up visiting terrible cruelty on them. There certainly cannot be a humane occupation. The majority of...
Yeah, so no humane occupation. Kind of emphasizing, Hitchens' humanist position. We haven't heard any of him, specifically any of his anti-theocratic positions, which I think would apply to both states, although I think he did mention it a little bit when talking about Israel. Since we're not seeing too much of it and we're very close to the end here, I just want to point out that Christopher Hitchens, in my assessment, would absolutely denounce what Hamas did as just an absolute atrocity, and in all likelihood, his position might be very much similar to the one in Iraq, where despite being left-leaning, he thought that the U.S. should invade Iraq specifically to remove Saddam from power. In a similar way, I think that it would not be a stretch of the mind at all to think that Hitchens would be in favor of invading Gaza to remove Hamas, but this is layered on the belief that I don't know if that would be his position. I just think it would be, but this is layered, of course, with the understanding that there's a lot of things that is going on with Israel that he would not support. And again, we have this type of thing where you could dislike what two parties are doing and dislike one party significantly more.
Jewish people in the diaspora and in Israel have for a long time favored a two-state solution to this problem. It's a national question. It's a land question. This is also the expressed view of the United States Congress, of American Jewry, of the United Nations, of the European Union, and of the Palestine Liberation Organization. It's what the majority of people involved in this view want. Why can't they get what we all want? Why is it made impossible? Because in both communities, the veto is held by the party of God.
Here we have, Hitchens bringing to fore a position I thought was going to be the most common one, which is that if you have two theocratic states trying to live together, that a two-state solution does not look like a plausible solution, even if it's one that's preferable to everyone.
In the first case, by the Messianic settlers, who think that by establishing fait accompli by violence and stealing other people's land in the name of the Jewish people and in the name of God, they can help to bring on the Messiah. If only, they say, we get all the Arabs out of this area and all the Jews gathered, then the Messiah would come, finally, after such a long, sweaty wait.
So this is, going to be a video that I've seen multiple times, that is used often as evidence, or not evidence, but an example of what is going on in regard to Israel settling Palestinian land.
ברצונו הקדוש ברוך הוא נתן לנו, שיבוא משיח בן דוד, אתם כולכם תצלם רגע את כולם.
Okay, let's move this a little bit.
Sorry about that. אתם כולכם, אתם תהיו עבדים שלנו אם תהיו ראויים, אם תתנהגו יפה. אתה רואה את הציצית הזאת? על כל ציצית אחת כזאת אתם תתפסו, ואתם יודעים שזה האמת. אז עכשיו, כדי שיהיה הכל בשלווה, ואנחנו רוצים שיהיה בשלווה, חצי אני גם רוצה לזרוע, וחצי אתם תזרעו. בסדר? ואתם, אם אנחנו נרצה, אתם תהיו עבדים שלנו. רק אם אנחנו נרצה. עכשיו, כרגע, אנחנו לא רוצים לעשות בה.
Yeah, this is. I think that the example is, of course, that this is disgusting. This guy's rolling up on they're taking another. The context is they're taking a Palestinian's land right now, and they're saying, I so have, you so have, and then you'll be my slave later.
אנחנו אומרים, אתם רוצים לחם, אנחנו רוצים לחם. אזרח חצי.
בסדר, אנחנו ניתן לכם לחם, אבל זה אדמה שלנו, לא ניתן לך.
מותק, אמרנו, יש היום ויש שתי מדינות. מדינה ב-77,
צריך לי לחשי, אללה.
תלך תעשה לחם במדינה שלך.
פה זה המדינה שלי.
לא, זה לא נכון. פה זה ארץ ישראל. לא נכון.
פה זה ארץ שלי.
זה של אבא שלי. האדמה הזאת היא של אבא שלי.
האדמה הזאת היא לא של אבא שלי.
של אבא שלי.
האדמה הזאת...
הנה, יש ניירות, זה של אבא שלי.
It's gonna be like something like...
זה שלנו, של ארץ ישראל, של יהודים. אתה יודע טוב.
Christopher.
This land belongs to the Jews, you know that well. Yeah, so that, of course, is what is going on. But this, of course, doesn't... you can't draw... Evicting someone from their land is not anywhere near, decapitating babies, kidnapping a whole bunch of people, and, For
Hitchens, let's go to Cambridge, Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much. Mr. Hitchens, I have 3 direct questions, short questions for you, please. Do you feel that Israel has a right to exist within secure borders? Do you feel that the United States should intervene?
So that's the end. There we have it. You know, those are the clips. I set it to loop, so there's no ad that plays at the end. And, you know, wasn't exactly what I was expecting, which of course is perhaps one of the benefits of these, is you get to see like my full reaction in real time, and it's certainly not necessarily what I had in mind in terms of talking about things and this sort of thing. But it is not entirely surprising given Hitchens' position as a humanist, where for him the solution is a 2-state solution that does not involve the continual appropriation of land, but would also certainly not allow for the violence that's going on right now. And I don't know what the solution looks like regarding what's going on right now. I don't want to sort of offer something up because I do not only do I not have the technical knowledge to know what would be effective or this type of thing, but also I just stuff is going to develop in real time, this sort of thing, and I don't want to have a sort of position that I'm not that confident in and have it to a video, and so I'll not say on it. But, just kind of reiterating kind of where we came into this, we do, in regards to my own positions, is that I'm not a fan of either Israel or, definitely not a fan of Hamas. I think in terms of you can dislike both groups, and a denunciation of one is not necessarily an endorsement of the others. Hitchens in denouncing, Israel's behavior in taking Palestinian land is not an endorsement of Hamas, right? And then at the same time, it's important to bear in mind that any sort of equivalency is, like, often equivalencies are just done in bad faith regarding argument, and evicting someone from their land is nowhere near, as I've said multiple times. But then also the humanist position, where if you want stuff if you value all, life, then having 2 theocratic states who think that their land is it's like over here in the Hitchens library video, where he's talking about it, but it's good luck with that. I don't know what the solution is, because my opinion is that it would be they would need to not see the other as being necessarily subhuman. I think that this is less the case with how Israel regards the Palestinians, but I know there's been UN injunctions of what is effectively apartheid, and it's not like they are and so let's just leave it at that. But it was a bit interesting to see Hitchens, and perhaps timely for seeing a little bit of the other perspective, or not other perspective. It's not one side or the other. It's perhaps interesting to see a perspective that is going to be less pro-Israel, given the context of what's going on right now. Almost every perspective, I think, in the West, or the vast majority, are going to be either they're going to be pro-Israel, or they are going to be I don't think that we're going to see as much pro-Palestine. And it's important to note he's talking about the Palestinian people, not the government organizations, and it's not an endorsement of Hamas. And so maybe this has been useful or interesting, seeing Hitchens talk about it, as well as some commentary. But yeah, not exactly what I was expecting. If you like this video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, etc., and have a good one.